Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Kramzer here. Today we are starting a new segment. Basically just going to hang out and talk about different musical topics. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about classic records and how much the mythology and the legendary status of these records influences people's opinions of them today. I kind of like to think that I'm pretty unbiased when I listen to music and try to listen with an open mind. And I feel like I'm a pretty big supporter of modern music. And I like to think that modern music is just as good as old classic rock. But lately, since we've been going back and doing these album of the year segments and going back and listening to a lot of classic rock, I'm really just feeling like these records are phenomenal. And I'm just sort of wondering what you guys think about the whole situation. Am I being swayed by classic rock radio and boomers telling me how great these records are, or are they actually better than anything today?
No, trust your instincts, Jason. They are better, which is not to say modern music is bad, but I do think there's more really good music today than there was. There's just a higher volume of it. But when you're talking about the all-time greats, the influential pieces of music, the music movements, yeah, it's old stuff.
You can kind of see today how much music kind of isn't as important, I think, to a lot of people, at least rock. I mean, rock and pop, I think, have kind of faded in their effect. It's just not how it used to be. It used to be a voice for change and a voice for, I mean, even if it wasn't a voice for change, it was still something, it was a huge part of everyone's life. Like that was one of the big mediums, TV, music. And now it seems like it doesn't have the same kind of effect and influence maybe on society that it once did.
I definitely agree with you there that the importance and social relevance of musics, and especially rock music, has declined dramatically, but I'm still not positive that means that the music's any better or worse.
The music's definitely worse. It sucks. I hate it. I'm not sure. People may not have realized it yet watching from the channel, because we're still kind of in the classic realm. We're in the 70s now of our decade, of our best albums by year. And I mean, this is, for me, by far the peak period of music, what we're in. But once you get past that, I mean, even into the 80s, kind of, I think it starts to get worse. I mean, honestly, from like 1972 or whatever, you want to pick the peak year, every year after is kind of less and less, to me anyway. Even with punk and everything in the late 70s, you kind of have that. And then the 80s, it's hair metal, and then grunge, and whatever it is today, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just my taste in music, but it just seems like there's so much less going on, so much less inventiveness. I don't know. I can't put my finger on why I dislike modern music so much, especially compared to, the classics.
Probably for the first time ever in our Trinity here, I'm actually in the middle of the spectrum. There's much more better music than I think Joe is letting on, but I don't think there's a debate here that Jason's saying. It's much better older. And I think one of the biggest reasons for that is human beings have this natural impulse to be creative and to find a channel for their emotions and their thoughts. And there's just so many avenues you can take now. Everything is so accessible. You can get an app to be a graphic designer on your phone and draw and do this. Everything is immediately accessible almost. You can easily put together an album on your laptop in a weekend. So I don't think a lot of the hard work and kind of tumultuous kind of stuff you got to go through to put it out is the same as it was before. So you're getting just a little less inventiveness, a little less creativity. But then again, like I'm saying, I think you do have just a lot of really good music, but stuff that's on the Mount Rushmore, the upper echelon, not quite on the same level. I do think there's a lot of really cool inventive stuff that have come out. It's just not as much and not as impactful. But that also just kind of goes from the core of growth of anything. The most authentic and the most original stuff comes from that spiritual journey you have to go on to produce it. I mean, the stuff that we talk about pet sounds a lot, and the stuff they had to invent and create and do authentically to get that vision down is now just in a library track on your iTunes folder. You know, it's just, there's not as much need to push yourself. It's just a lot easier and a lot more accessible. And I do think it's a lot more by numbers. The genre is so settled in that you kind of get an idea of what your genre is going to be, who your influences are. You know, there are obviously bands that came out in the 60s had influences, but now it's like you read a review on someone and there's 14 bands and 3 movements where you're like, these are the influences. And there hasn't been a giant musical movement in like the last 20 years. I mean, hip hop took off, but you know, early hip hop had a big voice, and I think now it's just a lot of top 40 stuff, a lot of dance music. Yeah, I just don't think it's quite the same as the old stuff.
So I hear you, and I think I pretty much agree with you in a general sense. But if you look at the best artists today, the ones who are still out there on the road constantly, still, you know, write good songs, still go into studios and record to tape, still making great records. Can these, the best music of today, the most authentic music of today, does it have any hope of competing with, say, The Who or David Bowie, or is it even possible that someone could make a record of that quality today?
I think it's possible, but I also think it's hard to label it as such without it getting 10, 15 years to resonate and see how it affects music, see how it affects people. Yeah, I just think that there's also, the radio is kind of dead. We're all in agreement there. Like radio in general is, you know, there's Pandora, there's YouTube. So everyone's got their niche. There's not an overwhelming presence of a genre other than hip hop, I would say, in, you know, pop music. Again, like hip hop is the biggest thing now probably. And, you know, even if you're just looking at that, you know, I think it was much more authentic and better in the late 80s and early 90s. And, you know, maybe right now it's kind of in its hair metal phase when it's all glitz and glamour, but there are exceptions to that. There's definitely really good stuff. Yeah, I really think the best stuff comes from a big social movement that goes through music. And I don't think we've had that really in a long time. So until something happens in regards to something on a more personal level that doesn't have anything to do with music, when we're not so numb and just casual with our life and swiping and all that, I don't really think it's going to happen anytime soon.
I don't know that I necessarily listen to music in terms of how it fits into a movement or the social relevance of it. Even with classics, I don't really think about it that much. Either the songs are good or they're not. So I feel like the best new music maybe can compete, and maybe it does need time, but not to see how it affects other people, but just to see how it sits with me personally.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone listens to music to be like, I want to get into this movement, but I do think that is what's going on in the soup bowl that makes it taste great.
Maybe, to a degree. Yeah, maybe.
For me, I mean, maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe we're running out of chord changes and whatever. But to me, I mean, the best music now, the most interesting music I've found are kind of genres outside of rock. And maybe rock is just kind of run out of ideas. But I find myself listening more to like a little bit of the country influences, stuff like Sturgill Simpson, more bands with women singers, things that, you know, weren't nearly as prevalent, you know, in the 60s and 70s. There weren't a lot of women singers. There was a little bit of country. I think just maybe rock is just completely out of ideas, and there's no kind of, or maybe it's just I don't like the current state of rock and I find it very uninteresting and most people untalented. But I don't know if I'm ever going to like something, you know, in the country-ish realm as much as the stuff that's already been done, because it does, like Ryan was saying, everything kind of sounds like something else. I haven't heard something truly original in, I mean, I don't know how long, decades probably. So it might just be kind of run out of interesting things to play with guitars and bass and piano until someone kind of reignites the fire. It's just not going to be the same. It's not going to have that spark of creativity and the kind of you had bands playing off each other like the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and I think that really helped the competition between them. Now I don't think there's any really of that left.
I don't know. I hear what you're saying. There's a lot of what's good today is basically based off of what was good then, but I don't think that necessarily makes it worse. I guess that's another discussion. How important is originality? I lean towards not that important at all.
I think you're leaning the wrong way, but
there's a difference between like straight up copying someone, being like a Greta Van Fleet or something that sounds exactly like Led Zeppelin, and just being a rock band. I mean, just because rock's been done before doesn't mean rock is over, or any other genre for that matter.
True. I think there's also just kind of, first of all, I think the studio and the producer is bigger now than ever. And, you don't have a big instrument that has kind of pushed creativity. Like people started playing guitar differently in the 50s. Synth blew up in the mid 70s and early 80s. And I don't think there's been that huge kind of transformative invention or discovery in the realm of instrumentation that has pushed songwriting and, producing in a way. We haven't had if someone discovered a new way that made the xylophone sound bizarre and killer and everyone went out and bought a xylophone and it works, great. But, we just haven't had that sort of discovery in a while. But, I'm with Jason too. I get what you're saying. I love a lot of new music. A lot of my favorite albums are from the last 10 to 15 years, but the majority of it, I think, is much older. So the answer is older stuff is better. New stuff is also really good.
I don't know if that's the answer. I'm still on the fence. I like to think that the best of the new music is just as good as old music, and it just needs time. I think it'll stand the test of time. And I think the reason the people the generation or two before us, when they hit 30 years old, they decided to make a radio format that just continued to play that music over and over again until it was totally ingrained in all of us. They've made 1 million documentaries about every band. There's been like 50 different Woodstock documentaries, every year it seems like there's a new one. They have put this music on a pedestal, and I think a lot of us and subsequent generations have kind of bought into that.
I think it deserves to be on a pedestal. I think early rock music does. I think classical music does. I think early hip hop does. I think popular country does not, but that's just me.
I mean, there's nothing today that has sold 1/30th as much as a Elton John album in the 70s or a Led Zeppelin album in the 70s, other than the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and the one kind of explosion we had in the 2000s. But people just don't have the same kind of need for that music. They're not, there's no band that people are loving and buying tens of millions of their albums of anymore. It just doesn't happen.
But that doesn't necessarily speak or have anything to do with the quality of the music. I don't think anyone's ever going to sell that many records again, just because the avenues through which people consume music now are so different and so varied. It's not like everyone's sitting around and listening to the same radio station. Everyone's getting their music from different sources now.
Well, right, but I mean, there's just no movement, I guess. I mean, you had grunge was the last kind of gasp of rock. What in 20 years, no one's going to remember any band from today. I don't think there's not going to be a single relevant, maybe other than Radiohead. And I mean, is anyone else going to be remembered at all? Will anyone care? People are still going to be listening to Led Zeppelin and the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and it's just never going to stop. And there's just never going to be, I don't think, another band in rock and roll that kind of takes the mantle and leads the young people to that love of rock and roll again.
I think we're starting to fall into the topic more of why it's not popular, whether than is it good or not. But I get what you're saying.
Yeah, I agree with you, Joe. I don't think there will be another band like that, but I don't think that matters. I think I can find some band that on the internet that I love and it becomes my favorite record, and maybe in 20 years I like it even more than Pet Sounds, but no one else knows what it is. But does that matter at all? I don't.
It might matter to you, but to 99% of the world, they're not going to share your opinion. People just don't share opinions like that. And maybe that doesn't matter, but you're just not going to have a band now, even if it makes a perfect album, the best album of all time. Is anyone ever going to recognize that other than maybe you, if that's your, opinion? And I think that has weight. I mean, people kind of know, and maybe, I don't know why they know, but people know that the Beatles and the Stones and Zeppelin and the Who were the best ever, and I don't think anything will ever change that, even if, we all have our favorites and an album we think is completely critically misjudged. Does that matter? I mean, I guess there's so much music today that yes, you could probably find an album that you think is on equal footing with Pet Sounds, but I don't think that's true, and I think that's a delusional thought of a crazy person. But how else, other than your own opinion, can you really judge that?
Joe, the list of newer albums that I like more than Pet Sounds will make you want to, but I think there's also a major thing that we're ignoring here is that, like they said, video killed the radio star. I mean, image and attractiveness is bigger and more important than ever. Would Jimmy Page be a guitar god now? He wasn't that attractive of a guy, so
he was pretty good looking. Come on, give him a little credit. Plus, Robert Plant was a golden god.
Okay, well,
that's all that matters.
More than likely, you've got to be magazine cover worthy now for the most part. There are exceptions, but maybe I'm wrong about that. But I definitely think image is incredibly important now.
I mean, getting back to the original topic, it sounds like Joe is saying that the mythology is tied to the greatness of something. It's just as much a part of it as the music. Sounds like what your argument kind of is.
I think it has to be, because it obviously has influenced me to a great deal. Whether or not something is better than something else, Rolling Stone gives out 5-star reviews every year. People give out perfect scores to current albums and artists, but I cannot fathom that being, anything today being better than, the peak period of the 70s. And maybe it's just the mythology of it, but in my mind, I hear those albums so much differently. Just the craft of them compared to today. It's just, I don't know why. Maybe that gets back to the original point of this whole discussion. Why do those albums sound so much better to me? It can't be talent, because people today have more talent, all across the board. People are better guitarists. They play the instruments better. They're probably better singers. There's more technology. There's coaching. Production is anything you want it to be. There's no limit, basically, to creativity. And yet, I don't know, it all sounds kind of hollow and just not as good to me, personally.
That's because music isn't just a network of ideas. It's not a computerized algorithm. When it's authentic, I agree with everything Jason's saying, but when you said originality doesn't matter, that is completely wrong. Because that's what blows people away, and that's what inspires greatness. And, think about, the idea of rock music in the 18th century would have been like, what the hell are you talking about? You've got, classical music to now is unheard of, and it's because of those ridiculous levels of inspiration that come from other things that produce these things. And now it's a genre. The genre didn't exist before these great albums, and now that it does, you can follow the lead and still make really good stuff. It's like a restaurant. When people say it's not as good, you can get in Pittsburgh, Permane Brothers is the big sandwich, and everyone's like, oh well, the original spot is the best. Why? Because it just tastes the best, because that's where they came up with it, and that's where they learned how to do it. Everything trickles down. It's a telephone line where the message gets lost every single time you talk. It still has kind of the same style, the same idea, but it's just not the same, and it's not as good because of the originality. Originality is huge, Jason. Can't believe you. How could you say that?
I think, there's degrees, and there's obviously cases where I think unoriginal bands aren't good, but a vast majority of what I listen to isn't super original. It's very much most of what I listen to is playing off of, 70s, classic 70s music. And it doesn't bother me at all.
But do you consider it on the same level as the classic 70s?
Some of it I do. Some of it I think is very close.
Well, put it this way, Jason. I mean, there were a lot of bands that you were into from like 2004 to 2009 that you just were like, this is awesome. This is just as good as the old stuff. But I don't really hear you talk about them as much. You talk about new stuff, and stuff from the 60s and 70s. So that stuff you're latching onto, and you kind of, from my perspective of you, kind of go through these waves where you love new stuff, but then the new stuff doesn't last really. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, that has to do with my listening habits. I mean, I listen to like 300 albums a year. I can't listen to everything all the time. So,
I mean, is there anything you go back to all the time that you'd go back to in the same level as like the Beatles or something like that?
yeah. I'd say like my top 10 from every year still gets revisited.
Well, that's good. So
Not
what's
for
the
me.
real problem here, Jason? What's the problem? I get what you're saying, but my answer is the mythology is justified. I'm with Joe, but I'm in between you. Like I said, I don't think new music is terrible. I think a lot of it is awesome. I love it, but just not as much stuff.
But the mythology may be justified, but does the mythology itself make you like it more?
No.
I mean, maybe on a like implicit sort of in my mind, buried deep, beneath the layers of my subconscious. I can't say yes or no, but I do know that I would listen to maybe 100 albums a year from 2013 to 2018, as much as I could. And I don't think I've listened maybe 10 of those albums ever again. Even albums that were my number one choice of the year that I loved at the time, they just have no lasting power, no staying power with me.
I disagree with that. Like I said, I'm in the middle. But you got to put it this way. Like people say now that LeBron is the greatest player of all time because of the prototype that he is, because the athleticism stood out when he entered the league. But with the way evolution goes, the same with music. In 15 years, everyone's going to be a LeBron. And then they're going to look back and be like, come on, LeBron wasn't that great. Look what these guys are doing now. It's your place in time and the originality is everything to me. It's huge. But I love history. I'm a romantic. I'm a sentimentality is huge for me. So I'm very impressed when things just come out of nowhere and are awesome.
Let's close this out with a hypothetical. If there was an album that came out yesterday that was somehow we were able to objectively measure that it was better than, say, David Bowie's Ziggy Stardust, and you listened to it and you knew in your mind it was objectively better, would you be conflicted in ranking it higher based on the mythology of the original?
No. But my point is the likelihood of that happening is lower. But if it did, I mean, when we do our top albums list, and you guys are going to be just ultra pissed off when I've got Interpol over any Beatles album. Like, I don't have a problem with it. But, comparatively, era by era, there's one clear winner for the era. Like the majority of it, like we were talking in the near 70 to 74, you're saying is ridiculous amount of albums. The originality is why.
Yeah, I mean, I have no sentimental attachment to David Bowie or the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or anybody because I kind of got into all that stuff later in my life. So I'm not, I don't have like a special memory of listening to the Beatles for the first time or a wonderful life event that happened when I was listening to the Beach Boys or something like that. I mean, I remember the songs that kind of got me into music and I hold them high, but I don't love, say, the Stone Temple Pilots nearly as much as I used to. But I think, I don't know where I'm going with this. The point is, if something was objectively the best ever, I would, agree with that. I'd have no problem discarding the mythology of the 60s and 70s. That means nothing to me. I'm pretty much just going by the music and what I think is kind of the superior and best ever.
We all at least agree on that final point, and we can end on a happy note. Some mysterious, objectively great album is better than all that crap from the 70s.
Fair. Let's get together and write it.
All right. It's going to have to be super original, I guess.
It's gonna have to feature like alien technology at this point for me. I mean, although everyone considers, you know, In Rainbows like the best thing ever, and I don't hear it. So maybe I'm just broken.
No one thinks it's the best thing ever, but it's pretty damn good.
All right. Well, I guess we'll close it out there. Thanks for watching, guys. Leave your thoughts below. I don't know how much of that conversation made any sense to anyone, but we appreciate it. Hit like if you like the video. Subscribe. Hit the bell so that you get notifications when new videos come out. And we'll see you on the next one.